Hello there, this is episode 20 of Audiovisual Cultures, the podcast exploring and examining different aspects and issues around image and sound-based cultural production. I'm the host and creator, Paula Blair. A huge thanks to everybody for the likes and shares on social media. They're really helping to spread the word. This week, Shail and I have a post-viewing discussion of a version of Ridley Scott's Legend from 1985. Since recording, Andrew figured out it wasn't either the European or the US theatrical release of the film, and it definitely wasn't the much longer director's cut, but something in between these that was perhaps a remaster for DVD release. We rented it on iTunes, so the details on that were a bit scant. I hadn't envisaged doing a recording about a Ridley Scott film or even a Tom Cruise film, but here we're doing both in one. But at least Tim Curry balances things out a bit, and it also stars your one from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Mia Sara. So I hope you enjoy the discussion, and I'll be back at the end with some details on how you can get in touch with us and engage a bit more. In the meantime, enjoy the discussion.
We've just watched roughly 93 minutes of Tom Cruise crouching.
Pretty much, yeah.
And on quite a few occasions I thought, so we're going to see his business? But no, they covered that.
Really?
Literally and metaphorically.
There's a few upskirt-esque shots in there.
So, Ridley Scott, Legend,
1985.
Right, yes. And cut which is not the original theatrical cut, either European or US, North America even. Seems to be a subsequent redub of the theatrical cut with the Tangerine Dreams music removed and replaced with a Jerry Goldsmith score, which by some accounts was actually written for the original film but not used. It was my idea that we watched this. It was just based on the fact that this movie, in its Tangerine Dream version, and also quite a long version, if I remember, longer than this. That version, I watched it when I was younger, taped it, watched it many times, and it kind of appears in my dreams. And little bits of it, particularly the fact that some of the goblins and Blix in particular, they speak in rhyme. That stuff sticks as well. So that bit where Blix goes, black as midnight, black as pitch, blacker than the foulest witch. That bit really stuck. Bits of this film come back to me sometimes in my dreams even. I thought, okay, let's do this. I hadn't watched it in a long time, so let's watch it, because we're probably not going to be able to get hold of the director's cut. Well, we probably can get hold of the director's cut, just not this evening. It'll probably be a matter of doing a comparison. Either we watch one version and then we watch another version, or it's me going, I don't remember that bit from when I was a kid. Because even though this is a short version, basically 90 minutes, and apparently the director's cut is more like 2 hours, there were some bits in this that I don't remember seeing from what I saw when I was a kid, which was probably the director's cut. It may have been that I didn't actually see the director's cut when I was a kid, and that what I saw was the UK theatrical version, and then we've just seen a later theatrical version for both the US and the UK. So I bring uncertainty to this discussion this evening, then Dr. Blair. So this particular version, I suppose, is all we can talk about at the moment. We'll do comparison work later.
And even just that point about there being different versions of the same films, I mean, and this is quite typical with Ridley Scott, Blade Runner, case in point. They're different films. We'll probably come to it, but I think it's worth noting that this one I had never heard of the film. It came out in 1985. I was a baby. Even though things like Back to the Future that also came out in 1985 very much were on my radar when I was a kid growing up, this film never came up because I think I was just too young for it, and then by the time I was old enough to watch it, that boat sailed. It just was never on my radar, so I didn't know anything about it. And last week when you were showing me some clips from it, there was alternative endings on YouTube. The one that you showed me had an ending where the Dark Lord character played quite incredibly by Tim Curry. He's just amazing. Yeah. There's quite a sinister image of him laughing because it's implied that his character's killed off in the end, but then there's this sinister image so that there's still this balance of light and dark, whereas this version that we've just watched ends on a very happy, clappy, all is good in the world sort of vibe. There's no hint of evil left in the world, which is quite, well, silly really.
As the end credits were rolling, I wrote down fairy tale plus fantasy plus polytheistic myth.
Yeah.
I wouldn't categorise this as a straight fantasy film or as a 100% fantasy film. part of that is that just not having a simple 2 or 3 second bit where one image is superimposed over another and it's of darkness laughing. It may be because of this film that whenever I hear Tim Curry speak, I feel rather terrified, but it may just be that that's how everyone feels when they hear Tim Curry speak, and that's why he got cast in this role.
If you think about his roles, he was Frankenfurter is probably the one that springs most to mind, but also in the 90s he was Pennywise in it, a television series. He was which pirate was he? It was in the Treasure Island. He's brilliant in that. Long John the Silver, is that right? He's done some really camp roles. He's done some very gothic horror camp roles as well as Frankenfurter. He's been truly horrific and terrifying, so I think he and his voice get associated with things. I feel like there's something else I'm not quite... Was he in something else where he's more a smarmy character? I feel like it was something like maybe a Home Alone movie or something. Maybe I'm not quite right. I think he's played the camp baddie in kids' movies as well.
In Muppet Treasure Island,
might just be that I'm thinking.
That is the archetype of camp baddie. So films that he has been in, 229 of them.
Wow.
This may take a moment. Talk amongst yourselves.
It seems like he's been doing a huge amount of voice work in more recent years. Birkenhead.
We've been saying this is a 1985 film, but it wasn't actually released in the US and Canada at least until 1986. It was released on the 18th of April 1986, and it ranked 56th highest grossing film in the US and Canada box office, with a total lifetime gross of $15.5 million, which is domestic. This is where the top grossing film of that year, Top Gun, grossed 176, nearly 177 million domestic. And
notably that was Ridley Scott's brother directing that one, Tony Scott.
Directing the same star.
And the same rising star. Risen star. Being mean.
Okay, let's get it out of the way. Tom Cruise crouching, almost never standing up next to a fellow human.
Only if he's on his own in a shot, and he's in a low angle shot, so that he looks really big and imposing on the frame, so that nobody can see how tiny he really is.
I mean, own the tininess, right? He's not that tiny, he's just a little bit shorter than average height.
Yeah, and he's, especially in this, very young, very fit. I mean, the legs on him, there's quite a lot of Tom Cruise legs showing off.
I find it difficult to concentrate at times.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, and he's a very attractive man. Embrace the shortness. That's what we say.
Now, this film is... Popular commentaries on this, the kind of things professional reviewers mention, include the remark that this was the film that put an end to the early 1980s fantasy. It's not cycle, but fantasy flourishing. So films that included Conan the Barbarian, the second one which is called Conan the Destroyer, Red Sonja, and The Dark Crystal. These were temporarily quite well-performing films, in the US at least. This film seems to have put an end to that. And I can see why that happened, because it's not quite the way Terry Gilliam would make a fantasy film, but it's getting there. It's a huge indulgence. It's into highly gothic set design and costume design. It's into very adult themes. There's quite a significant seduction narrative in this, with the seductee becoming the seductor. There's horror elements as well, and the fairy tale bit is also bringing in another mythical tradition that is different from the fantasy elements. I can see why it's categorised as fantasy, but I think by categorising it as fantasy, what we do is we go, these things are now allowed into the fantasy camp, and they include things which are very not fantasy. One of the things about the Conan films, for example, is that there is such a thing as magic in this world, but there's no evidence that any of the gods that people pray to are actually there. So there is a supernatural realm, but the god part seems to be a myth. Seems to be a mistake. Whereas in this, there's the same thing. There's magic in the world, there's a fairy that can do some magic, and darkness has the ability to do magic, and the unicorns are magic. There's a spectrum of magic creatures. But then darkness keeps talking to this person that he calls his father, who does just appear to be an evil god. So there is a god in this environment. Whereas the norm with fantasy is there's the supernatural but no gods. I think that might be one reason why it put an end to fantasy, is it took fantasy and it mixed it in with all these other things that aren't fantasy and made that part of the genre, and I can see that why it would have been distasteful to the fantasy fans, at least, because we're talking here about people who've been reading books in this genre for years. Those are
Waters
the
it
people.
down, does it?
Not waters it down, but it mixes it with another genre.
And they want pure.
If you're looking for people who are Puritans about genre,
Mm.
then it's sci-fi and fantasy people who are getting most likely. And I speak from experience.
Whereabouts does Labyrinth set in conjunction to this, do you think?
I think that's part of this fantasy flourishing.
Can you remember what year it was?
I'm tempted to go with 1984.
Probably because it was a bit more child friendly. That was on my radar. I did know that film now. But it was one that I never got hugely into. But probably because of the Jim Henson connection, the parentals thought it was fine.
1986.
Right,
Labyrinth.
so it's roughly about that time.
Yeah, and I suppose Labyrinth and The Dark Crystal are the two Jim Henson fantasy films
yeah.
from the period. And Labyrinth is more child-friendly. That might be another way in which... Well, genres don't disappear. They wax and wane. It's probably more accurate to say
But
that.
it would have been already in production when
Yeah.
this was happening. It was a very different kind of stardom. Well, that's one for another time. We had rewatched it quite a while ago, but it was a matter of weeks before dear boy died. That's probably worth revisiting. You're very knowledgeable and interested in this fancy sci-fi world. It's something that I've just dabbled in a little bit, but there's only so much of the chiffon dresses and the affected running like you're dancing that I can really take with these films, because it's like, oh, we have to have a slightly girly element in here, and I get a bit fed up with.
Yeah. It's maybe another reason why the film didn't do very well, or word of mouth kills films, because it may have looked really regressive in the context of what film was doing at the time, because it took those bits of fantasy in which women are completely passive. It's fantasy written for heterosexual men who don't like the idea that women are agents. Strand of fantasy, and it just went with that completely. But I suppose actually it got a lot of that from fairy tale as well. Because if you look at look at Red Sonja, she does not need saving at any point.
I don't know that film at all, actually.
Right. And I'm doing a kind of assuming dates here. I'm thinking Red Sonja, 1983, 1984-ish. Almost certainly before this. It's Brigitte Nielsen.
All right.
As Sonja. July 1985. Fantasy films had characters in them who weren't the main character. Well, that's what I'm talking about. In Red Sonja, she is the main character. Although she shares this prime spot with Arnold Schwarzenegger. But they had female principal characters who were as active and as important to the drama as protagonists as the male characters. But then in this, we have to give it to Mia Sara's Lily. There is this dominant narrative of female guilt, female liability for things that happen, even when it's not actually their fault.
Yeah.
But she does instigate this plan at the end which deceives darkness and means that she frees the unicorn. She earns, somehow through something she's done earlier in the film, she earns Jack's trust to trust that she's going to do the right thing, even though it looks like she's about to kill the unicorn. She's solid enough for our main male character to go, no, she's pretending that she's about to kill this unicorn. She's going to free it. She's deceiving big bad darkness. We may have that element, but it by no means outweighs this, you've caused this entire situation in the first place, narrative that the film has.
There's a kind of original sin blame put on her.
And darkness refers to the act of her having
as a sin.
Touched a unicorn. It's not that she killed it, right? She just touched it and distracted it long enough that one of Darkness's own goblins could hit it with a poisoned dart and then hunt it down and then hack its horn off. It may be that what's going on is that this film goes, she thinks that it's a pointless taboo. It's just, this is forbidden. That's what Jack says about it. He says, this is forbidden. She thinks it's a pointless taboo. She breaks it. She thinks there's not going to be any negative consequences because it's a pointless taboo. But it turns out that the thing that looks like a pointless taboo isn't actually a pointless taboo, and it has huge negative consequences. All these things that look like pointless taboos, women listen to them, social control. Perhaps.
It's very slippery, isn't it? The Dark Lord says he goes from almost defending her. He's annoyed at the goblins because they only killed the stallion, and they say that the other one's only a female, she has no power. And then he says only the power of creation. And then not long after that, when he's confronting Lily and trying to seduce her, he tells her that her sin trapped the unicorn, not that she was having this lovely experience. with a creature that came to her willingly.
She was just singing to it.
She sang to it. It came to her because it liked her singing, and it came to say hello to her. She gave it a quick pat on the nose, said hello, and then all hell breaks loose, and apparently that's all her fault.
There may be something else we ought to observe here, which is that it is an antagonist who makes that claim about Lily. The other characters...
Yeah, they defend her quite a bit.
They don't have the opportunity to have a sit down with her and go, it's fine, we don't blame you for this.
Yeah.
They'll get dragged off into separate situations. But at the end, we've already had Jack, who had led Lily there, being forgiven by the pixie.
He was blamed, and they forgave him.
And then at the end, there's no negative, you got us into all this fuss in the first place business. With Lily, everyone's very happy that she's survived and is
It's
okay.
interesting how she's framed, because she very quickly realises that it's her fault without anyone telling her. And the first thing she says is, I'm going to put this right. She takes it upon herself to put it right. She doesn't go off looking for anybody else to fix it for her. She doesn't sit and cry. She's upset, but she says, I did this, I have to fix it. So she goes off and figures out how to fix it.
So I suppose maybe what the film is doing is it's going, hey, this antagonist holds her responsible for it. It's possible to hold her responsible for it for the wrong reasons, but actually you should hold her responsible for it anyway, because she accepts that responsibility.
She blames herself, and in a way it is a bit victim blamey. She's quite naive, and it's established very early on that she's naive and that there's a bit of mischief in her. And it's not that she's evil, there's just this hint of mischievousness in her. The first thing we see her do is she goes to visit this poor peasant family in the woods that she's very attached to, and the woman, the mother, is sorting out the laundry. Lily knocks off the washing line, and the woman goes, oh, bloomin' pixies.
Bloomin' fairies.
Bloomin' fairies, that's what it was.
This is a highly populated
Yeah,
universe, isn't it?
'cause
With
it's
lots of different sorts of magical things.
They live beside this magical forest, so she doesn't even assume that it was Lily who did it. She blames it on the fairies. That's what Lily wants. So she's got this air of mischief about her, but she's called an innocent as well. So this is someone who's quite naive and doesn't yet know the potential consequences of their actions and thinking things through. So she learns very hard lessons, but she confronts those lessons and she takes them by the horns in a way.
And I suppose this thing may regard women as needing saving, in part, but not only does it have her be the one that takes the decisive action that saves the female unicorn, so she's put into a kind of male situation there. We also have this intense sexual awakening scene that goes, this person's agency is not to be equated with evil. Her sexual awakening scene is she gets magically redressed from the tatters of her white princessy outfit into this completely black, highly eroticizing dress. Her getting sexual agency is associated with evil through these conventional colour codings of white and black. It's when she gets this black gear on that she starts to take the initiative and try to manipulate darkness so that she can solve the problem and help the unicorn to escape. She gets converted into Lily 2.0, who wears black and is very sexually adult. That is implicitly denoted in several ways to be a really positive thing, at the same time as it being associated with danger. There's ambivalent elements to this.
It gives her an air of confidence to go through their plan and to look very convincing that she is going to kill the unicorn. The plan is that she's supposed to slit its throat with a sword, is that it?
Yeah.
The tension's really built up. She looks very poised to do it, and just the very last minute, Gump is imploring Jack to kill her, shoot her with the arrow, and at just the very last instant, Jack says, I know I trust her, and there's that callback, as you say, to the earlier thing.
Talking of structure, there is some quite solid structure here, isn't there? There's lots of things set up in the first 10 or so minutes, including that she's thrown this ring into a pool.
Yes, again, there's a lot of sexual overtones with this stuff. She takes her ring off and says, I'll marry the man who finds this, and throws it into the lagoon.
Jack instantly dives in after it, and in the minute or so that he's under the water, this eternal winter falls upon the landscape, and when he comes up he hits his head on ice, which is terrifying.
And I think if you compare that scene with the later scene at the end when he dives in and successfully finds the ring, tie that in with the stuff about Lily's sexuality. It's like the first attempt has to be aborted, the first attempt just doesn't go right.
So him not getting the ring,
He's
and then him coming up
out.
against this frozen wall
Yeah.
on his way out, and then second time gets the ring and bursts really quite powerfully
climactically
through the and there's
with
water
lots of
everywhere.
spray.
Because it's not just that he's in water; it's also raining quite hard as well. So it comes up with this water hitting him from above. Right, yeah. You know what? This is going to sound completely implausible, but I hadn't thought of that. This was a symbolic.
Well, if you'd seen it very young and you haven't seen it since, I would like to hope you weren't thinking about this.
So it's a symbolic having a go at sex and it not working the first time round, and then
not ready.
Yeah. But the second time round, now everyone's ready. They have a go, and
it all works fine. And they're all happy.
It's brief, but
Only young.
I did have to do a little bit of checking how old people were in 1985.
Because they all looked tiny, but they were all sort of in their early 20s. I mean, the thing with Lily, because when it was playing that dance, it was the dress itself is dancing. It's like ballet movements, but it's quite, you were saying it was quite homoerotic, this dance that was happening.
I don't remember the scene being that long when I saw it when I was younger.
It felt like it dragged on.
So clearly we saw a full version of the scene in this cut. That's why it struck me as it's quite homoerotic, because it's Lily, she's just finding a way around this, what is effectively a prison, which is dark as this massive fortress. She hasn't actually met anybody yet. She's just being spooked by shadows all the time. She's teetering around, looking at things. She's terrified. And then she notices over her shoulder that there's this figure wearing a dress, but the figure just appears to be darkness. It's got, I suppose the way you do it is that the person's wearing some sort of head stocking thing. Presumably it's a woman to cover her head. I looked in the credits, it's a woman called Liz. This film does this a lot. Reaction shots where people have shadows and light kind of flickering on their face. So we have one of those reaction shots, and because the dancing dress is dancing in front of a fire, so lots of shadows and light on Lily's face. And then so she's terrified watching this thing which doesn't appear to be a human, which is just a dancing dress, watching it dance. And then it comes up to her and it nearly touches her and she looks terrified, and then it goes away and does a bit more dancing, and then comes up to her again and then actually touches her and she looks breathy and I really want this. She's got this look of extreme temptation on her face, and then she seems to reluctantly agree to dance with it, and then very quickly gets really into dancing with it, and there's lots of twisty-turny so that it's difficult at points to see who's on what side. They're moving really fast, and then there's that bit where they spin off apart from each other and they're doing basically the same thing but about 15 feet apart from each other, and so she's just really got into dancing with this figure. And the figure is not a specific woman, but it is, in being a human figure wearing a dress, it seems like it's just femaleness. There's this thing that wasn't on her radar before, and now it's suddenly an opportunity. I mean, I'm kind of thinking about Dorothy narratives here, because the whole Dorothy narrative is clearly about adolescence. She starts off, she's not menstruating yet, gets the ruby slippers, menstruating, then puberty, which is a path to adulthood, yellow brick road. Along the way, encounters all of these non-normative sexes, genders and sexualities in the form of the three guys. Do we have an equivalent here? Well, she's a young woman who has this symbolic coming of age quest, and one of the things she discovers seems to be just enjoying something that is apparently both forbidden and promises to be really fun with this dress figure. And then what happens is that they dance and they dance and they dance, it gets more and more frantic, and then suddenly she's wearing the dress. So she and that figure have become one. If Tom breaking the surface of the water so very powerfully is a second and successful go at penetrative heterosexual sex, that scene where these two figures are dancing and then suddenly they've become one figure, that is the film's symbolic allusion to either sexual experimentation or masturbation. I remember very clearly when I was in high school having girls who were my age, and it was at about age 14, 15, insisting that it was completely normal to have a gay phase. Now, this is of course not necessarily true, but the perception that it is true is itself a reality. It's the idea that almost every teenage girl will at some point go through a 6-month period when she's convinced that she's gay. That perception of female adolescence involving these extreme changes seem to be embodied in that really long scene.
From my own experience, it's probably more likely that it's a deflection away from feeling able to pleasure yourself and learn about your own sexuality on your own. It's not something that girls are supposed to do the way it seems perfectly normal for boys.
It's presented as her giving in to something which is almost certainly going to be wrong. Does it turn out to be wrong? Well, all it does is it puts her in a new dress.
It actually enables her and it gives her a lot of confidence. It means that she's ready for Jack when they meet again.
So the idea seems to be it's something which she senses is wrong. She does it anyway. It turns out that it wasn't wrong.
Because although it opens the gateway for the Dark Lord to pass through, because he emerges from the mirror that she finds herself in front of. And then you could go into a whole Freudian thing about the mirror stage, the self-discovery, and then the sexual awakening. She's discovering herself, and that's not fully a bad thing, but she lets this darkness through, who is fully evil, but the confidence that she has, the power that she has, she uses that against him and takes him down with it.
It does take her a while to get to that point. When he appears, she's initially utterly terrified. Mm-hmm. And when he appears to be about 9 feet tall. The shots of his hands, it's just veins and muscles. He just seems to be made of veins and muscles. And I did say while we were watching it, as he emerged from that mirror, is this a symbolic version of a teenage girl's first encounter with a penis? Or a heterosexual teenage girl's first encounter with a penis? Or at least a dramatisation of the perception that it's a matter of this vast beast of a structure petrifying this tiny, non-active person. Given what had just happened, given that she just suddenly acquired a degree of sexual independence, it seemed to fit. I suppose the thing about casting Tim Curry as Darkness is just that casting will slightly upset a set of meanings in the film which specify that he is her rapist or that he is her seducer, because he's associated with non-heterosexual characters before this. And the whole setup is redolent of Beauty and the Beast. And of course, in Beauty and the Beast, he comes across as terrifying to her initially, but she comes around when she realises that he's not all bad. And there are little moments in there where it seems like there's these kind of shots where it's quite close up on his face, it's about a medium close up, and she just asks him a question or just refuses to do something, and he looks quite scared. He's thinking, oh, blimey, I can't just make this person do what I want them to do, I have to persuade them to do it. I've lost this power which I'm used to. There's little free-sort of vulnerability in him. That was perfect Beauty and the Beast. So it looked like it was going down this route of she's going to reveal the marshmallow inside him and they may get together, which again is distracting from a rape narrative that's going on there. So, lots of narratives going on at the same time. He does, of course, also just turn out to be evil. Although his evil is specified as being a bit clingy, a bit inadequate to the task, because he's constantly talking to his evil father god. He says at one point, I can't get this girl out of my head, I want to figure out how it is that I make her agree to be mine. And then this whispering voice appears from the evil father god saying, this is how you do it. And then when Darkness is being attacked at the end by Jack and his companions, he calls out, Father, protect me. There's so many things that alludes to. It's not alluding to Beauty and the Beast anymore. It's almost certainly a biblical allusion, because that alludes to one of the lines attributed to Jesus on the cross, which is, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. So right at the moment where a son of a deity is about to die, that son of that deity addresses the father.
And there was a kind of David and Goliath battle between the Dark Lord and Jack as well, so I just find there's quite a lot of biblical stuff going on.
This is the thing which fascinates me, because in a lot of story spaces the rule seems to be, okay, the supernatural exists, but it's a different sort of supernatural from God. So the Harry Potter universe is my kind of go-to example. That's a universe where the supernatural exists, but it's not a theistic universe. Humans are as intelligent as the people in charge of this magical fluid that's in the universe. But every now and then, it doesn't happen in Harry Potter, but every now and then in a lot of fantasy narratives where there's supposed to be no gods, people just mention gods anyway. This is probably trespassing on a future podcast, but we've been watching a lot of Red Dwarf recently. And I noticed at one point that the cat said something about God, not a god, but just God. And I went, oh, hang on a minute. The cats have a mythology, and that's a mythology in which there is a god, but it's Lister.
Yeah.
It was called Cloister. It's basically Lister. And so this god's name isn't God, the god's name is Cloister, and he's already found out that Cloister doesn't exist because Cloister is Lister. So why is it that this character refers to God later on? Well, it's just because it's a turn of phrase. It's just this thing you say. And there was a point in legend where Jack referred to whether God was willing about something, but there's no indication that there is a God, a good God, or at least the one that isn't Darkness's dad, in this universe. As far as Jack explained when he was describing the unicorns, they were basically the most powerful positive force in the world. when you're somebody who's grown up surrounded by a monotheism, that word makes it into your vocabulary quite a lot, and that indirectly then makes it into the vocabulary of your fictional characters too. There's an odd little mixture of accounts of what is and isn't magic. This brings us into the realm of production design. There's lots of fantastical elements in this. There was a little kind of Blade Runner callback, which was the little statue that seemed to come to life, which I just sit and watch while the dress was dancing. It started off almost looking uncannily made of stone, and then it just turned its head to the right, and it was actually a person wearing a mask but sprayed in grey paint and covered in little shiny flecks. Oh, and this was a movie in which a lot of the characters spend their time covered in glitter.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if Tom Cruise is still trying to get the glitter off his arms.
Yeah, this is
so much glitter.
And it wasn't like they're covered in glitter after they've been through a very magical situation. People had just have glitter on them.
Constantly covered in glitter.
Lily, when she first went into the forest at the beginning, glitter. Or maybe that was supposed to imply that you just take the first few steps into the magical forest and you get dusted with glitter because there's that much magic around. So there's all these magical things all over the place. But in addition, there's lots of non-magical animals. There was birds all over the place.
Bear?
Yeah, starting off with a bear, that was a bit...
It was real, because I noted that down. I said, I wrote in my notes, if this was today, all of these things would be CGI'd in. They wouldn't be real animals. They were all real animals.
Yeah. That bit later on in the film where they got a fairy who had been captured, they got him out of a pie. His name is Blunder. When they got him out of a pie, loads of pigeons came out as well. It was great production design. They just stuff live animals into things. Loads of birds, the bear.
There's lots of little scuttly things,
there was
creatures.
Rats crawling around the tables in the evil kitchen in Darkness's Fortress. This was a story space that was teeming with life, in addition to having all these magical elements in it. And of course, I think this is a bit of a trope with fantasy. Having this teeming environment illustrated by having lots of moats, lots of dust motes, and they're just things like dandelion seeds, blowing around between the camera and the subject. Just having stuff between the camera and the subject. There seemed to be a big Ridley Scott thing in this. Lots of grass or flowers waving in the wind in the foreground.
There was always noise happening as well. I've noticed in the kitchen especially, there's a very heavy snoring, very heavy breathing. All the noises are amplified.
Before we get onto sound, I don't want to get onto sound. These are environments where if there's a table, it won't just be that there's a few things on the table or there's somebody standing at the table working. The table will be groaning with stuff, it'll be covered in produce.
Mounds of things.
That's one of the things that gives this a fantastical element. Well, there's kind of different meanings of fantastical. There's fantasy just meaning there's this world and it's different from our world in that the seasons are very different. So winters last 5 years, that kind of thing. There's a difference. It's not like that. This is a world where people seem to be able to work at tables that are already completely covered with stuff, but there's no actual room for them to work at the table. So it's just suspending basic practicalities. Fantastical. The messiness of mise en scène, I don't mean messiness in a bad sense, I just mean there's stuff.
Loads of stuff, everything's cluttered, it's really thoroughly designed.
Yeah. In times it was, when they ended up in the dungeons in Darkness's Fortress, there's straw and dust everywhere and they all roll down into it and dust puffs up, and then as they escape from that bit of the dungeons and they're walking around the other parts, there's these huge grates through which steam keeps blowing, or it's something that's supposed to look like steam, so it's not actually dangerous, it's just these very big fans blowing stuff. Lots of leaves at certain points getting blown by huge powerful fans. There's the bit just after the unicorn's being hit by the dart. Masses of petals. It's like trees that are in bloom are just instantly dumping all of their petals, so all of these blossoms going all over the place. The bit when Jack first meets Gump and the other pixies, suddenly all these bubbles appear.
That was weird.
Yeah, like someone had gone, hey, I know what looks a bit magic.
Here lads, I've got a land of a bubble machine. We'll have to use it.
We've got it for a day. And Ridley goes, fine, anything to make it look otherworldly. Lens flare used at certain points to look quite fantastical. Having shafts of light visible. If there's haze in the air, you can actually quite clearly see the edges of shafts of light. So there's bits of that.
And of course, shafts of light become a plot point as well.
Yeah, that's how they win, is by introducing...
Reflect daylight down.
And rain, lots of rain as well. So all these things are mess in the air around the characters.
It's really tactile.
This is Ridley Scott, who's been directing for a decade by this point. He knows his stuff. He can make shots look extremely visually interesting. He can make shots where there's no camera movement, pictorially quite lovely. He can choreograph camera movement with movement of performers. He can shoot horses with prosthetic horns stuck to their heads, which, if they move more than just a little bit, will make the horns wobble. You can shoot them so that you don't ever see the horns wobbling. You can shoot them for quite small amounts of time. He knows to use low-level shots to exaggerate the speed of things moving. This is a person who is aware of how to make shots give dynamism to a scene. This is somebody who goes, oh right, so I'm shooting with a widescreen film stock, so I'm going to have quite sprawling vistas in my forest. I'm going to use the full width of the frame. I'm going to pack as much as possible into each shot when I'm in interiors as well. This is a camera that very rarely came up close to characters. It did it just once or twice. It did it early on when Darkness is talking to Blix, my favourite goblin. It just showed Darkness's hand pointing. It's just his finger actually. It's pointing towards Blix, and then Blix's nose enters the frame from the right. And I thought that's rather unusual for this film, because already it had gone, I'm going to show you big environment.
There was a lot of intimate stuff as well. I was thinking there were a lot of facial close-ups that were a bit tight for my comfort. Usually between Lily and Jack. They were just a bit too tight. They were a bit soap opera tight.
Yeah, I think he's thinking, I have to stimulate the curiosity of my viewers by having it painfully obvious that there's all this stuff happening in an off-screen space because my camera's so close up to my subject. There was one moment when you went, oh, and it was when Brown Tom appeared to get shot in the head. Did you think he had been shot in the head?
Yeah.
Because it was an Irish gag. He's been shot in his, what is it, elderberry wine? He'd been shot in his alcoholic drink. That's how Irishness appears in this film.
They kept it. They kept it under his hat.
And I think when you get shot in your hat, the general film rule is when you get shot in your hat, you haven't actually been shot, because a lot of your hat doesn't have your head in it. But this film momentarily convinced you that he had just been shot in the head. And then, of course, there was the comedy. Oh, so they killed you as well? Bit of dialogue. And then it's revealed that it's his little bottle of wine he keeps on top of his head, inside his hat, that's been shot. Also, this is a film where you get shot in the bottle of wine that sits on top of your head, and you believe that you've been shot in the brain, and you fall over and remain unconscious for several hours, and only get up when someone comes along and goes, I'll just take your hat off to show you that you haven't been shot in the brain. This is the reality in which these characters live. If I had to pick a favourite scene in this film, it is when the goblins are attacking for the second time, and they're trying to capture the mayor and Lily, and Brown Tom's the only one to defend them. He's defending them with a frying pan. That is quite funny.
Saying, keep it coming, lads. That's all you've got. I think that Irish accent was better than the one in the film.
Looking for a fight, you've come to the Chapel of Light. It was every Irish cliche you can think of. So, sound.
Whale song in the forest.
It seems to me, we've got to look into this, but it seems to me that this is entirely rebuilt, this soundscape, from the original one, but it's still a very rich soundscape. So whale calls for the neighs of the unicorns. And I suppose someone's going, hey, unicorns aren't going to sound like horses, they're going to sound like something much more ethereal and powerful. So whale song. You've mentioned this already, the busyness of a lot of these frames is accompanied by the busyness of the soundscape. There's whooshing and there's fluttering and there's splashing. It's a very tactile world, sonically as well. Someone drops something, it makes a noise. Although there was one bit where Jack dropped his shield and they'd just done a bit of Gump trying to figure out how deep the hole beneath them was by shooting an arrow down into it, and it went clank, 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 clank. And then several seconds later, the platform they're on shakes and Jack drops his shield down into the hole. It doesn't make any noise at all. But apart from that, lots and lots of noise. Even that bit when, what's her name? Meg Mucklebones, I think she's called. This witch who seems to live in a swamp. She's being playfully scary with Jack, and her claws, they scrape on the surface of that shield. That was a nice little touch. But music, and that seems to be the reason why a lot of the sound was redone on this film, not the original music. The flavour of this film, that I remember from watching it when I was younger, is the flavour that comes from the music having been done by Tangerine Dream. And I've never listened to their music outside of this film, but it's such a different feel from that I got, at least, from the version we've just seen, which is all Jerry Goldsmith. There's a piece of popular music that plays during the credits, but that didn't seem to be particularly distinctive from the orchestral soundtrack. And I think, okay, fine, yeah, it's Jerry Goldsmith doing Jerry Goldsmith, all fine, but it doesn't seem to go with this film. When it's fantastical, it's too saccharine, and then when it's not fantastical, it's just the music that would go with the drama. There's a sonic register that goes with fantasy films. When Howard Shore did the soundtrack for Lord of the Rings, he seemed to have hit all those bases that fantasy film soundtrack, rhythms and instruments and keys. So I'd like to find the original version. It's your game, because it's different. There's an anarchic edge, I think, to these characters too, which it implies this was taken from a book. I don't think it was actually taken from. I don't think it's an adaptation at all. By the way, I'm looking at that right now.
Lily in particular, again, one of the first conversations she has is with the woman in the little house, and this woman's saying, "Oh, you shouldn't be coming to visit us poor folk. You should be out looking for a dashing prince on a white stage and all this nonsense." Lily's not interested. She likes doing her own thing. Then she's looking for Jack, who's not a prince, he's this forest boy. He's teaching her how to communicate with the animals. He takes her to the unicorns. When she leaves, this woman's given her lots of warnings about the forest. Don't be doing this because there's these kinds of creatures and all this kind of stuff. And Lily's just like, yeah, whatevs, I'm grand. And she's yelling for Jack quite a lot, drawing loads of attention to herself, and of course the goblins find her. So already you've got this coding of she's really belligerent and won't listen to reason from these people who know better. But you have to step out of it and think she's got autonomy and she has to find out for herself. And then it's similar with Jack when he's telling her, no, you can't go anywhere near the unicorns, you can't sing to them, you can't touch them, you can't do that. She goes ahead and does it anyway, and he runs off.
He kind of stomps off. It's quite a sulky exit.
Yeah, he gets annoyed with her because she hasn't done what he's told her to do. So she's quite willful and stubborn and determined, but she's curious, you see. And it's like stamping out her curiosity because she's curious about the woods. She wants to learn about the animals, the creatures and everybody who lives there, and she's being discouraged. She never knew about the unicorns, and then this guy shows them to her, and of course she's curious. What do you expect her to do? Of course she's going to try and say hello to them.
And it's not like she personally does any damage to the unicorns.
Yeah.
Did you notice, there's probably a visual rhyme in this, but one of those very early shots when it's Darkness's finger and Blix's nose, that is then echoed later on by Lily reaching out her hand and then the unicorn touches it.
Yeah.
With its nose. Blick's favourite goblin, played by a woman called Alice Playton. These people in this film, any character could have been played by anyone, couldn't they? Because most of these characters are made of prosthetics, including Meg Mucklebones, who was played by Robert Picardo, who's the Doctor in Star Trek Voyager. I mentioned the anarchic. The thing that seemed to me to be the most anarchic was when Jack is first approached by all these pixies because something's gone wrong with the unicorns. Gump initially seems quite confrontational towards him, but then goes, "I'll help you if you can answer this riddle." He does a riddle, and then Jack goes, "It's a bluebell, right?" And Gump has a tantrum. He has a kind of screaming, punching the ground tantrum. And then when he's finished that, he seems to die for just a moment, and he gets up and he goes, "Okay, yeah, fine, I'll give you a hand." That's like a minute spent just watching one of the characters have this childish tantrum. Oh, not to point out, the character they got to play Gump, if I can find it.
He's very young.
Yeah. David Bennett. And David Bennett was, apparently this is quite a big thing, he was the main character in The Tin Drum in 1979. And The Tin Drum is an adaptation of a Gunter Grass novel. Just from this poster from the film, he looks really familiar, doesn't he?
Gosh.
And that's who they got to play.
The eyes. That's terrifying.
Yeah. I've seen many stills of this boy before. There's some really brave casting decisions were made here, including getting actors whose first language isn't English to play these characters. Some American stars. The actress who played Una was a veteran of British TV but didn't seem to have done any films before. I did say, while we're on Una, played by Annabelle Lanyon, is she 12? At the point when Una's asking Jack, Tom Cruise's character, for a kiss, she's got this look of extreme childish anger in her eyes. I thought, okay, physically she's 12, maybe 13, but this is a child, right? And I looked it up and she was 22 at the time when this film was made. So I was going to point out that things were different back then and you could have mostly naked children doing adult things in films, but actually no, it wasn't. She was plenty old enough. But I suppose what this reveals is she was deliberately cast to look quite androgynous because she'd almost certainly had her breasts bound to do it. She was kind of boobless. That also was the effect of the black dress on Mia Sara, Lily. The black dress is split down the middle.
Mm-hmm.
It's got like a
Yeah,
6-inch
shows her
wide
full
gap all the way
torso.
down to her waist.
Yeah.
And so it pulls her boobs to the side. So it makes her look really boyish as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Gump, when he first arrives, he's something like 13, 14, just wearing shorts, and does all of this contorty upper body stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Again, looking quite androgynous. It seems that maybe this is a Ridley Scott thing, or maybe it's members of his crew seeming really to like women who look boyish, or actually just seeming to really like people who look androgynous. This is also Tom Cruise with long hair and with all the upskirt moments on Jack.
Bare legs.
Maybe this is happening with all of our characters, except for our two comedy Irish pixies, of course. Our main characters go through experiences which emphasise how androgynous they are.
It's worth pointing out how the film uses the polarisation, the binary opposites of good and evil, light and dark, winter and spring, those sorts of binaries, to have this black and white picture of morality. As soon as it goes to darkness, after the male unicorn dies, everything's dark, it goes to a deep winter, as if these things are evil or representative of evil. Winter is poetically thought to be this time of death, but actually it's a time of preservation. Things are recoiling into themselves and surviving by being internal for a bit, by hibernating and that sort of thing, which is life-sustaining. The darkness can also be a time of peace, tranquility, quiet. With Lily, you've got this meeting ground of the two things, of all of these things, because she's the white, she's the lightness, but she's got that air of mischief in her. And then when she seems to have turned to the dark, she still has the light of goodness in her. There's that gender and sexual fluidity, but also that moral fluidity being channeled through her.
I suppose what a lot of the characters learn is the radically changed world after the stallion unicorn has been killed. It's one they can still survive in. It's not as pretty and warm as the world as it was before, but they can make it. They can handle the darkness. They can handle a changed environment.
But also that opposition justifies the killing off of all the evil people. And it seems like, to think about what you were saying about the Dark Lord not actually being in control of very much, and actually being himself almost like a teenager, having to look back to his dad to tell him what to do. There's a sense that actually he's got a naivety, and that he's not fully bad because he's fallen for this woman who is full of goodness. I think it's he says it early on the line that innocence is unicorn bait, they put it. And the unicorn is attracted to her. The stallion unicorn is attracted to Lily's singing. So she's the innocent thing that it's attracted to. She's the innocent thing that the Dark Lord is also attracted to.
Do we think then that her innocence lasts to the end of the film? Or is the film about her losing that innocence in a kind of maturation narrative?
It's possible, but I think it also turns the idea of innocence on its head, because she's innocent in that she's very naive, and she does a lot of growing up through the events and having to be accountable for her own actions and her own thoughtlessness, but also that learning curve of just being curious and learning about the world, but because you sort of blunder about for a bit and then you figure it out. And I don't know if we ever get beyond the blundering stage. I certainly haven't. I think you could read into the film that it's not as clear cut as all that, because she's still got both in her. We've all got both in us to a degree.
I suppose the ending's saying you can make mistakes and you can still regard yourself as a good person, and you can still be the same person. It doesn't mean that you've fallen, radically changed in some way from the original innocent version. One thing that did slightly get me about this is the reason why the sun comes up and goes down is because the Earth is rotating while it's orbiting the sun. On this planet, the thing that makes the sun go up and come down is unicorns. It's the magic of unicorns that makes the sun go up and come down. So, does that mean that it's the unicorns that make the planet that they're on rotate? No, because there's no sign that the Earth's going to stop rotating or has slowed down rotating because one of the unicorns has been killed. It seems actually that the Earth is stationary and that the sun literally comes up and goes down. It goes around the Earth. Which means that this narrative, this fantasy, takes place on a flat Earth. It takes place on a kind of disk world where that long identified to be a mistake model of how physics works is actually how physics works. That was one of Terry Pratchett's things. It was, okay, yeah, I know that obviously laws of physics in our universe mean that this Earth obviously isn't flat, but let's just imagine if that was actually the case in somewhere else. How would a flat Earth work? What would it look like? How would it have gravity? What would the days be like? Would there be days and nights? I'm not saying this is an exploration of what flat Earth physics would be like. It just inserts that flat Earth can somehow work. There may be a small bit of resistance to this in the sunset moment, where they use the rays of the setting sun to bounce them down into darkness's fortress to kill him. If that's the sun that's being made to go up and down by the one surviving unicorn who's about to get killed, it's the unicorn who kills darkness. But if it's the unicorn who kills darkness, can't the unicorn just directly kill darkness? So the unicorn seems to be slave to some sort of natural set of limitations. This is what happens when you take supernatural explanations for natural phenomena, is just after a little bit of elaborating, they fall apart. They just disintegrate into the waste of their own inconsistencies. And it requires a much more willing suspension of disbelief for a story like this to be meaningful, when there's this possibility that the sun might not come up anymore. If you and I said something like, now we live in this age where the sun doesn't come up anymore, we'd probably mean something like, there's a lot of pollution in the sky, but the Earth's still rotating and the sun's still appearing and then disappearing. It's just, we don't get to see it much because of all this clouds in the sky, something like that. Wasn't the living chair grotesque? That was quite Muppets.
It reminded me a wee bit of Labyrinth. Is it a river she has to cross? Where it's...
Is it the Bog of Eternal Stench?
Oh, it's that.
And the rocks that fart when you stand in them?
Yeah, it reminded me of that actually, because it sort of looks like it's bubbling up from the sea area. So yeah, there was quite a lot of grotesque, carnivalesque stuff, I thought.
Maybe what Ridley Scott thought was, I'm doing my own version of this, I'm doing Scott fantasy. Maybe it was entirely his production designer, and he just went, okay, yeah, that's cool, it's not how I would have done it, but let's do this anyway. It's automatically quite adult. Maybe that was it, maybe it was that simple, maybe it was, you've made it something that only adults can go and see, therefore the main cinema audience that's keeping movies a lucrative industry suddenly cannot come and see this film.
It was also a bit molesty, that chair, and the fact that the Dark Lord's insisting that she sit, and that's another moment of defiance for Lily.
And all she says is, I prefer to stand.
Yeah.
I do wonder what this spongy chair, the writhing alive chair, was for, though. If she had sat down, would the chair have done something to her?
Because I was imagining it would grab her, or...
It had hands as well, didn't it?
It would lock her in, a bit like in Ghostbusters, where Dana's flat is possessed, her building is possessed.
And what is it that...
She sits in her armchair and the arms grab her. It's quite scary.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
I always sort of thought, oh, don't sit in that, that'll happen.
These are thinly veiled references to rape, aren't they?
I think so, yeah, I would say. That attempt to control her mind and her body.
Yes, because he's trying to persuade her.
Even the clock, you know the clock in the peasant house?
Yeah.
It's got the revolving thing.
It's a skeleton chasing a person.
Chasing a woman.
Oh, chasing a woman.
It's a dress.
Right,
the first figure's
so,
wearing, so there's this constant motif of a woman in a dress being chased by something unsavoury.
That's foreshadowing then. Okay, well, what seems then at first glance to have been a film which is about celebrating female non-agency actually seems to, in some cases at least, just quietly protest the removal of agency from women.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, I think some of the stuff we have been watching lately, and I suppose you mentioned Red Dwarf earlier, it's an example of something that there's barely any women have ever been in it, but it was more feminist years ago than it has been in the recent ones, and it seems to be a very worrying trend, and I think there's been a similar regression in this kind of film. I haven't seen enough really probably to say, but it just feels like with Hollywood and the film industry and bigger issues lately, it feels like there's more of a struggle at the moment, because it feels like there was quite a serious regression in the 2000s. because Lily is really strongly spoken. She's assertive. She knows her own mind. She does her own thing. It's established really early on that she's a princess, but she's not gonna follow the norms and the conventions of her birthrights. I mean, it's a very white person film, and you've got a lot of small people playing typical dwarf and goblin characters and stuff. So in terms of diversity, there must be some sort of diversity Bechdel test equivalent. There's the ones with the women, but there's also, I mean, it might even pass Bechdel in a way, because if you count the dancing dress, it might actually...
I think the conversation between Lily and Nell...
Well, no, because they talk about her having to find a prince. Doesn't count.
Well, maybe a little later when Nell says stay clear of foxglove and so on. This is how films pass the Bechdel test, isn't it? It's
the very thinnest of...
A woman says, would you like a drink? And another woman says, no thank you. And that's it. That gets it past the Bechdel.
I think in terms of, it's such a short sequence that these two characters are even in communication with each other that I really don't think it counts. But I think the dancing dress and the discovery of the self probably just about does it.
Well, yeah, they have to have a conversation, you see. That's point 3.
Yeah, well...
There has to be a conversation about something other than a man.
Can a dance not be a conversation? Is that too abstract? The equivalent of a conversation if they dance, yeah, because there's communication happens.
I think you're going to have to consult...
Bechdel.
Is it Julie Bechdel?
Julie Bechdel. The test is flawed, let's face it. Anyway, I was just thinking, because just about everybody in the cast, I think there's the one Indian guy, and that's about it. And he's got a big massive visor over his head for most of the time he's in it. Anyway.
There's only 3 characters whose ethnicity you can tell for sure in this film. Everyone else has loads of makeup on and or prosthetics.
But you know who they are. And yeah, you can't see who Tim Curry is underneath. He's still Tim Curry.
His voice is the first one we hear, and it's terrifying.
Do you have anything else you would like to bring up?
I want to have more films in which characters speak in verse.
Oh yeah.
Including films in which I say one line of verse and then you respond to me with an answer, and what you say is the second of the 2 lines, corresponding lines of verse. I want to make a prediction, which is, if and when we watch the version that was first released in cinemas, we are going to go, oh right, that makes sense, but we're also going to go, this is still a bit shoddy, because the ADR, the original version was ADR'd as well, this has kind of been doubly ADR. I think the ADR, the additional dialogue recording, was quite poor first time round, because I remember when I was a kid seeing it and going, hang on, why did that person's lips just not form the sound that they just made? Of course, at the time I didn't know what ADR was. So I just thought that I'd misunderstood in some way. There was one point where the character's mouth actually formed the sounds of what they said, but what they said was different from what I remember them saying the first time round. So the first time round seemed to be ADR'd with them saying different things. This version was ADR'd with them saying different things in other instances as well, because there were some points where, didn't you find yourself going, that person's mouth just made the wrong shape?
Yeah, there were. There were times when it was maybe the mouthed part of the word they've said, but they haven't finished it. They haven't done the second or third syllables of the word.
And we ought to point out that another bit of evidence of this having been tinkered with long after theatrical release is there's some, not just scenes, but some shots that seem to end really abrupt.
Very abruptly.
So that the first 15-20 minutes or so of the film moves rather oddly fast.
Rampant. And then there are sections that go painfully slowly. So it feels like an edit where they've taken lots of story stuff out that you would probably benefit from. I mean, there's stuff with the goblins where there was dialogue when you mentioned, you thought there was probably something before that would make this make more sense, because you had to just work out what they were doing. But then there was parts like the dance sequence just seemed to go on forever. Jack and Lily first meeting and just running around in the forest just seemed to go on forever. I got really bored during those parts.
I got a bit bored of the unicorns running away.
There was loads of that. There was loads of just unicorns running, and there was loads of repeated shots.
Okay, yeah, and let's name the elephant in the room. There's a shot late on in the film when they've killed darkness, it's denouement time, and the only thing they need to do is Lily's in some sort of evil spell-induced coma. the world's returned to normal, but Lily's unconscious. So Jack needs to do something to restore her, and he realises that if he goes and he does that challenge that she set him earlier, which is go and get the ring from the bottom of this little pool, she'll marry him. And now it seems to be, if you get the ring, she'll wake up. And then there's a shot of him jumping off this very high cliff into the pool, where he could just go to the bottom of the cliff and walk into the pool. There's a shot of him diving into the pool off the top of the cliff, and in this long shot, if you look at the top right, you can see Lily wearing her princess dress from earlier in the film running after him, because it's exactly the same shot. They've just duplicated the shot from earlier in the film when he dived into the pool, but she was there having just thrown the ring into the pool. There's stuff you don't notice when you're watching this stuff in cinemas, but people like you and I, we will scan frames more, we will watch and rewatch. I don't know what they were thinking. Maybe they were thinking, we have no other way of getting this shot. We're out of money. The set did burn down, it seems, during production, so maybe by the time they came to do that bit of the set had burned down.
I think it would have made sense if they just showed him swimming. They just cut to him swimming.
Yeah.
You've already had it set up that that's where the ring is. Just cut to him swimming for it.
An underwater shot of him diving into the water would be fine if you
Yeah.
wanted to have him entering the water being something you show.
I suppose it's this spectacle and it's this vehicle for this young star, Tom Cruise, and he's going to become a big action star actually, so it's part of the creation of that. He's doing this heroic grand gesture for the woman he loves. It was blindingly obvious, even on the small screen we were watching it on, so what must that have looked like on a big screen?
There was shots where the stallion unicorn, as it was dying, was lying down, and they were clearly reversed shots of the horse getting up. Some of the shots of the unicorns running were repeated several minutes apart. But yeah, I suppose we could regard this as just one of the most basic acts of cinematic creativity, is you go, okay, we've used that shot already there. Is there some way we could reuse it later to keep costs down? I suppose if you just had a big set burned down that cost the majority of your budget, we could forgive him that.
You'd probably just assume people wouldn't notice, but it's probably the same thing today. You'd be able to paint her out quite easily and cheaply. Thanks very much for listening. I think that has raised quite a few more issues for us to pick up again later. If you have any suggestions or challenges you would like to set us for later discussion topics, you can email audiovisualcultures@gmail.com or tweet @avcultures. Thanks so much for listening, supporting and engaging. Catch you next time.